Hi, my name is Jolene Philo, and first of all, I would like to thank you for volunteering to be part of our Wonderfully Made Family Camp in 2017. We're doing our training a little bit differently this year because the camp actually begins with families on Friday and runs through Sunday. We didn't want to ask our volunteers to take a whole extra day Thursday to come in for training. So some of the training we're going to be putting online on our Facebook page, and that training is for our new volunteers. So if this is your first year as a volunteer at Wonderfully Made Family Camp, we would really appreciate you completing this online training. There will be 2 videos you need to watch. The first one will be with me, and I'll be just giving you some general information about working with people who have special needs. The second training will be done by Kim Combs, and he'll be doing more work on behavior issues and how to handle them. The rest of the training will be done on Thursday evening. New volunteers will come at 7 p.m. and we'll be working with them at 9 o'clock. The volunteers that were at camp last year will join us, and we'll go over some things that you all need to know together. So for those of you that are going to be doing the online training today or whenever you do it, for us to know that you have completed it, we would like you at the end of each training to leave a couple comments about some new things that you learned and some things you already knew. So be sure to leave your comments after you've completed the training. That's it. If you have any questions, you can email me, Jolene Philo, JolenePhilo, at me.com, or you can check with Beth Castile, and you've already heard from her. She sent you some emails about being a volunteer already. Check with one of us if you have any questions. Otherwise, enjoy the training, and we will see you at Family Camp on, I believe we start on June 1st. Until then, have a great summer. Bye-bye. I'm going to try this. There. Can you hear me? Am I okay? All right. Well, I have to tell you that yesterday when I went to a Super Bowl party after the training, I went back to Boone where I live. I told my husband and the 10-year-old little boy that was at the party that Tim Tebow had talked to me earlier in the day, and they were very impressed until I told them the truth about it, and then they really didn't care. I am here as an author and a speaker and a former teacher, but I'm also here and I'm really going to try and get through this time without tearing up like I did yesterday. I am here as the parent of a child with special needs and the daughter of a father who had special needs. My son does very well now. He was born with his esophagus not connected to his stomach, so we had 5 years of surgeries and lots of procedures and some other issues, but he's on his own and independent, doing very well. My father was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis when I was 2 years old in 1959. He was 29 at the time. I'm going to give you a lot of numbers, so you have to skip over that math. He was 29, and he lived in our home, and we cared for him until 1983 when he went into a nursing home and lived there until 1997. When he went into the nursing home, he was the youngest resident. When he died, he was the youngest resident and had been there the longest. Yeah. I don't remember my dad walking, so his MS really took him down pretty quickly. Then he plateaued and did fairly well. And I will never forget the day when we went to Hammer's Restaurant in Lamars, Iowa, where I grew up, and a gentleman came over to our family and started talking with us. He turned out to be the regional director for Easter Seals, the Easter Seals camp down here in central Iowa, and we had never heard of it. And through Easter Seals, we were able to get Dad quite a bit of adaptive equipment that he needed, and he started going to the camp for a week each summer. And that was the highlight of his year every year, because my father was a very gregarious, outgoing person, and he had a volunteer assigned to him 24/7, so he had a constant audience. And he just loved it. And he ended every sentence ended with "and," so no one could, they had to wait for what he was going to say. He perfected that. But he came home and said, I got to go swimming and I could move around in the water just like anybody else. It was like I wasn't in a wheelchair for a while. And we had a dance, and I got to dance in my wheelchair. And he demonstrated that for us at home, and we got to be his partners, which mainly was him kind of wiggling, doing the chicken dance with his arms, and then we kind of danced around him or twirled his wheelchair or whatever. So, but it was really cool. And I've never forgotten that. I'm older now, and that memory from when I was maybe 10 or 11 or 12, and the joy in my dad's face and seeing him come home, that made an impact on me. And you, by volunteering for this prom, have the opportunity to make that same impact on your guests that will be there and on their families. So thank you very much for doing that. All right, now we'll get on with the training. And you have a handout there. There are some little fill-in-the-blanks and some places where you can write notes if you like, because I am a former teacher and you just have to have a handout. That's just the way it is. So when you are with the guests who will be here, there are two basic guidelines that you need to remember at all times. These are very important. First of all, confidentiality is paramount. You will be learning some things, I'm sure, about your guest and the special needs that they have and what you will need to be doing to help them. But that is confidential information, much like teachers and pastors and healthcare workers have to keep your information confidential too, because it is a privacy issue and it's not something that they or their families or when we're the one whose information is being kept confidential, not everyone needs to know about that. So what you learn needs to be kept very quiet. You just need to know it and keep it to yourself. My husband is a nurse at Mary Greeley Hospital. I will have people, and he's in the heart cath lab. So I have people that I know in Boone who will come up to me and they'll say, "Oh, your husband took care of me. He did such a nice job." And I just go, "Oh, that's nice. I didn't know that," because he can't tell me any of that. It's very important that we keep that confidential. So to practice that a little bit, we're going to do a little bit of role playing. I need 3 brave volunteers who also like to ham it up. Okay. I saw you. Guy in the orange shirt? Do you want to? You have to read some stuff. Do you want to come up and read some stuff? Okay. One more. All right, we got 3. Oh, for this one, I only need 2. So I'm going to save you. We've got more. I'm going to save you. You come on up. You come on up. No, come on up. We'll get the 2 of you. Okay. Do you like to read? Yeah. Go Broncos.
I might need reading glasses.
Uh-oh.
Oh, I can see it maybe.
All right.
Oh, that's big.
Big enough? All right. Okay, and I'll help you if there's any words that you don't get. You can be host 1,
Okay.
and you're host 2.
Okay.
You're going to have to belt it out.
Okay,
Okay.
I'll be loud, okay? Okay. Well, that was an interesting training.
It sure was. Get a load of this. My guest, Brian Smith, has severe autism, and he's sensory sensitive. So he has meltdowns when his environment gets too noisy or bright.
Well, that's simple compared to the guest assigned to me. She's got Down syndrome and functions at the level of a 5-year-old. Her name is Letitia Weaver. Have you ever heard of her?
Stop. All right. Anything that needs improvement there? All sorts of things. Names, first and last names were used. Their conditions were mentioned. They were kind of talking it over, can you top this? Not a good idea. Let's try it again. We'll give them a second try, see if they can do better.
Well, that was an interesting training. I'm not sure I'm up to this.
Why not?
The guest assigned to me has severe autism and is sensory sensitive. What do I do if he has a meltdown during the prom?
I know what you mean. How do I entertain someone with a developmental age of 5 for an entire prom night?
All right? Better? No names used. That was good, but we're still talking about different people's conditions, and once they're seen with their guest, Each of them is going to know what their conditions are, and, you know, there may be some confidential information. You get a third try, all right? Let's see what we can do this time.
Well, that was an interesting training. I hope I'm up for this.
What's the deal?
My guest has some behavior issues I'm not sure I know how to handle.
You know, I have a few questions about how to entertain my guests during the evening, too.
There's Beth. Maybe we should go talk to her right now.
Or maybe it would be better for each of us to contact her individually to keep her guest information confidential.
Good job.
Very good. Good
Yeah.
job. Nailed it on the third try.
Thank you.
All right. You see the difference? You know, it is okay to say, I've got some concerns, I don't know what to do, but then you need to go find the right person who can answer your questions. And if it's not Beth, it might be the person who's training you tonight. We don't want to overload Beth too much. All right. The second basic guideline that we need to make sure and follow is that you should think of the chronological age of the person you're escorting and act accordingly. Now, that might seem kind of difficult or unnatural if your guest's developmental age is far below an adult's age, but the guests that are coming are adolescents, they're teenagers, they're young adults, and we need to treat them according to their age, not their developmental level. So learn what their age is and think, how do I act around someone else who's that age, and do the same thing. All right? Let's talk a little bit next, now that we've got those two guidelines down, let's talk a little bit about language. There are some politically correct terms that you can use, and there are some politically incorrect terms that used to be useful but have kind of gone out of practice. So you've got a list there of terms to avoid. One of them you really want to, that is the real red flag one, is retarded. That is a very offensive term because it has become just such a put down. So that is a word, just don't use it. And I'll be talking in a minute about some other words that you can use instead. I'm not going to go through and read all of these, but over in the right-hand column, look down at the bottom three terms. There's suffers from, victim of, and wheelchair bound. Now, the reason we don't want to use those and several of the others is because they have negative connotations. And we can't impose our perspective about what suffering might be, what it is or what it isn't to someone else. You know, there may be someone coming who has cerebral palsy and is living a very good life, and if you say, well, you suffer from cerebral palsy, all of a sudden they're like, what? I didn't know I was suffering. So don't impose what you think is suffering on someone else who may not see it that way. The same with victim of. If we call someone the victim of, I remember people saying my dad was the victim of multiple sclerosis. Well, all of a sudden that enables him and us kids, if we had been allowed to talk that way or think that way, to develop a victim mentality. So again, that's another word not to use. And the same with wheelchair bound. It's kind of like your life can't, if you're in a wheelchair, you know, like your life doesn't, you can't be as free as someone else, which definitely isn't true. Some words to use instead of retarded, it's very good to use, got them over here on another page, developmental delays is a lot more appropriate right now, so developmental delay or cognitive impairment are the words that are used. Instead of blind, many people prefer visually impaired, and instead of deaf, they prefer hearing impaired. Then, in anyone you are talking about who has special needs, it's very important that you use what we call people-first language. Make sure you put the person first. So instead of a disabled person, say a person with disabilities. You've put the person first. Instead of a special needs person or a special needs child, you say a child with special needs. Instead of autistic person, you say, have you give it a try. I'm on to the next page. Sorry, I skipped ahead. Let's go, instead of a wheelchair-bound person, say person in a wheelchair or person who uses a wheelchair, either of those. Instead of autistic person, say, I even have a friend who has a daughter who has autism, and she always says, my daughter experiences autism, which isn't, think about that. That's a whole new way, puts it in a whole different light, doesn't it? All right, I need 3 more volunteers to help practice some people first language. Come on up. Come on up. Okay. Now, I'm going to have the young lady sit in the chair. That is actually a wheelchair, but you are not wheelchair bound. You are a person who is using a wheelchair. So you are Waverly. You can be the host.
I'm the host.
And you are Sam.
Nice.
Okay? And Waverly, sometimes yours, you just kind of have to do the motions because sometimes you don't even get to talk, sorry. All right, go ahead, we'll do the first scenario.
Hey, Wave. I'd like you to meet someone. Sam, this is my friend Waverly. She has cerebral palsy. Can Sam call you Wave too?
Hi, Wave. Nice to meet you. I'm so sorry to see you suffer from cerebral palsy.
But
Being wheelchair bound must be so limiting.
and she's speechless. She can't think of what to say. She didn't know she was that limited. All right, let's try it again. Second one.
Hey, Sam. I'd like you to meet my friend Waverly. She has cerebral palsy. She's also a Broncos fan and can pop the most amazing wheelies in her wheelchair.
Hi, Waverly. Sorry to hear you have cerebral palsy, but if you figured out how to pop wheelies, you're on your way to overcoming your limitations.
Can we talk about something other than my limitations? What about them Broncos?
Okay, the better, yes, but still, we're focusing on the limitations. By the way, I wrote this before the Broncos won yesterday. I just want you to know. And yeah, all right. Got it. Did I have something screwed up?
No, it's good.
Okay, all right. They're just practicing their parts. This is amazing. Quick study.
Sam, I'd like to introduce you to my friend Waverly. She likes to be called Wave. She also loves chocolate, Harry Potter, and the Broncos.
Nice to meet you, Waverly. Is it okay if I call you Wave?
Sure. If it's okay for me to call you Sam.
It's a deal. Who's your favorite character in the Harry Potter books?
It's a toss-up between Hermione and Luna Lovegood.
What? I had you figured out to be a fan of Ron or Professor Snape.
And I thought you'd be a Broncos fan.
Looks can be deceiving.
Okay. Thank you all very much. All right, in that final one, you notice that they took time to get to know her as a person. And when you get to know someone as a person, you have a lot more to talk about than just what can be seen externally, and so that is important. And I mentioned Professor Snape just in honor of Alan Rickman. Okay, let's talk about some communication tips now. Some things that you can do to aid communication so you have things to talk about like we saw in the third vignette there with these 3 people. First of all, and you notice that this was modeled here too, ask your guest how he or she wants to be addressed, and then speak to the guest as you would anyone else your same age. So ask them, they might have a nickname that they prefer to use, and then be ready to have them ask you the same question and to be ready to answer that. Make some small talk with your guest. Ask about their interests, hobbies, school, work, family, their church, if they go to a church, anything that's of interest to them. You can talk about the weather if you want, whatever. And once you've done that and you've kind of found maybe some common interests or some areas that you can talk about, that is going to be a springboard for you throughout the whole evening to have a few ideas of what you can talk about with your guest. Now, it is all right to offer assistance. And it's best to offer assistance rather than just to see something and give assistance immediately. I'll tell you a little story about that. When I was growing up, our church in Lamars, Iowa, had lots of steps. My dad was in a wheelchair, and so he had to have help getting up the steps. And we had two entrances. One, there were lots of steep steps, and one, there were just a few steps. But when we would park, it seemed inevitably these well-meaning people, men would come, and Mom would get Dad into his wheelchair, and they would take him over to the steep steps, and there'd be one on each wheel in the front and one on each handle in the back. They would lift him up and take him up those steps. My father was afraid of heights, so afraid he never learned to ride a bike, and he refused to go in an airplane. And if they had seen his face when they lifted him up in that wheelchair and kind of sailed him up those stairs, they never would have done it again. My parents were too polite to ever tell anyone that. But I'm telling you now, ask someone if they need assistance. And my father would have said, well, why don't we take the shallower steps up here a little bit further, and then you just will flip my wheelchair back, you'll get behind me and flip it up, and then you can bump me up the steps. And he would have stayed on terra firma and felt much better about everything. So offer assistance, that's important, but then ask how to do it. What is it they want? Offer a handshake. Even if the person has limited mobility in one of their limbs, that person has probably already come up with a way that they shake hands. If their right hand can't shake, they might reach out and grasp your hand with their left one. If they've got a prosthetic device or a partial limb, they might have already figured out a way. It's much better for you to offer to shake hands than to stand there looking aloof and standoffish. That's giving the wrong message. If you are speaking to your guest through an interpreter, whether it is a hearing impaired interpreter or there's a assistive device like an iPad or something, speak to the person, not to the interpreter. Now, think of it this way. Have you ever seen kids interacting with a puppet? And the adult or whoever has the puppet can have the puppet right next to them and be moving the puppet's mouth, and their mouth is moving at the same time, but the kids will watch the puppet. Now, I'm not saying your guest is a puppet. That's not what I mean. But for the kids, the puppet is the important figure. For the prom, your guest is the important figure. So key in on that important figure and just let the interpreter do his or her job. Don't lean on a wheelchair or walker. You can just kind of see that one now, right? All right, now I want to demonstrate something here. If these were in the way, I might take them for my prom guests during the dinner and just put them over here. Now, if I haven't talked to my guest about that, what's going to happen in a little while? Shout it out. Wonder where they're at. Yeah. So I need to make sure, and I did. We talked beforehand. I asked if I could borrow. You need to make sure, if you're going to be very helpful, that you ask first. This is especially important if you have someone who has maybe a bag of medical supplies, something for a feeding tube or a trach tube. They need to have that with them wherever they are. But by the same token, that adaptive equipment could be your guest's way to be mobile. And so we never want to have that taken away from them in any way. So be sure to ask about that. If there's anyone here with a service animal, you need to ask permission before you interact with that animal, because that animal's job is to assist the guest, not to interact with you, and you don't want to distract that animal from what it needs to be doing. If you're speaking to someone who has a visual disability, always be sure to identify yourself first. And this is going to be a noisy environment, right? There's going to be a lot of people around. There's going to be music. There's going to be excited voices. There's going to be a lot of color, a lot of stuff going on. It's going to be very distracting. The noise factor is going to be very distracting for someone who has a visual impairment. So in addition to introducing yourself, be sure you say where you are standing. I'm standing right in front of you, or I'm to your right, or I'm to your left, or even, introduce yourself and then introduce the other people and give their position too. And then let each of those people speak so that the visually impaired person can hear them and get an idea of what their voice sounds like. Give them as many cues as you can. Now, it might be that your guest may have trouble understanding you at first, and you may have trouble understanding your guest. So it is really, really important for you to be very patient. Don't raise your voice. You know how it is if someone's speaking another language, what do we do right away? We say it in English louder so they can't understand it, but it's louder. That's just something we do. So don't get frustrated. Don't raise your voice. It becomes more and more frustrating and turns into a snowball effect for you and for your guest. If you've repeated the information, and it's okay to repeat the information, and it's okay for you to ask your guests to repeat the information, but if you can't get past that communication block, ask someone else for help, or if the parent or the guardian is around, just ask them to assist you a little bit so that you can understand better. Okay, now it is also possible for awkward situations to arise. Some of our guests may have some behavioral issues, especially if they're living with autism or have some sensory sensitivities. So we need to be ready, if need be, to calm them down or to help them get to an environment where they can calm down. I mentioned already that the prom is going to be really a noisy environment. I don't know if there's going to be a disco ball, but there could be lights, there's going to be all sorts of colors, there's going to be sounds, there's going to be people. And for someone who has sensory sensitivities, that can very quickly become overwhelming. And someone who's dealing with that may respond in what you or I think is an inappropriate manner, but all they're trying to do is limit the stimulation, because what often happens to people who have autism or sensory sensitivities is you or I can screen out a lot of the stimuli coming into us, and we can tune out what doesn't matter, and we can focus on what really matters. But someone with one of those special needs can't do that, and so they're being bombarded, and it just becomes too much, and they might shut down totally. They might cover their ears, they might cover their eyes, some of them will kind of hunch down, some of them will start rocking, they might start yelling or humming or screaming or crying or fidgeting. They might get a fearful expression, they might have aggressive behavior. Watch for those signs, and if you think something like that is happening, you want to ask for help even if you sense it's becoming uncomfortable or it could become uncomfortable. Don't wait until things are full-blown to get some help. What can you do if you observe those signs? First of all, the first thing I would suggest is try to redirect your guests to a quieter location. Now check with your volunteers that you're going to be working with here in your smaller groups, those of you who are pre-prom and prom buddies. Beth may have some information for you on a quiet room or an area where you can take your guests so that they are away from the stimulation and can get quieted down. So find out from her what the protocol is for that. If that doesn't work, you will want to find your guest chaperone or guardian or parent if the situation persists, and ask them to come and help, because they're experienced and they can help with that. Be sure you keep your composure and speak calmly and kindly at all times. Just make sure you do that. I remember one time I had a boy with pervasive developmental disorder in my third grade classroom, and we went down to the gymnasium before Christmas to sing Christmas carols, and have some fun. Well, not a good idea for this little guy. And I looked over down the line, and here is the poor little boy. They're all cross-legged on the floor, and he's just and starting to hum. And of course, in a situation like that, all the other students are starting to kind of eye him. So I had to go over and I very gently, touched his shoulder as lightly as possible, because touch can be a problem also, and then just whispered in his ear and gave him a choice, because sometimes you need to just give a choice. If you give an order, you might not get anywhere, but if you give a choice, it's like, Billy, not his real name, Billy, we need to stop rocking, or I can take you out into the hall where it's quieter. You let me know what you want to do. And he actually calmed down then and was able to stay, but I was ready to take him out if need be. So have a plan A and a plan B in mind, and be calm, because your calmness might calm that person down. It's really important to make sure that you and your guest are always accompanied by or in the sight of at least one other person. We don't want any wrong accusations coming up that anything inappropriate happened, so be where other people can see you at all times. And maintain physical boundaries with your guests. Well, how do you determine what those boundaries are? Well, what's appropriate for you? What's appropriate behavior for you with other people the same age as your guest? That's appropriate behavior here. For someone who's just a friend, what's the appropriate behavior? Show it to your guest. And just let your guests know, I'm your friend, and this is how friends act. This is what friends do. And if they make an inappropriate gesture, friends don't do that. This is what we're going to do. And if it continues to be a problem, get someone to help you. And in the same vein, be a friend to your guest, but do not encourage your guest in any way to view you as a boyfriend or a girlfriend. Just stay away from that at all costs, because some of the guests do have a younger chronological or a younger developmental age, and they might take what you're saying incorrectly, and you don't want to encourage that. You want to encourage friendship only.